Have you ever noticed how silence can become so loud it almost hurts your ears? That's exactly how our house felt after Emily packed her bags and drove off to college that crisp September morning. One day the hallways echoed with her laughter and music. The next day, nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the old clock. My husband, Tom, God love him, is the kind of man who finds comfort in routine, like a cat finds comfort in sunbeams. Every single evening, without fail, you'd find him planted in that worn leather recliner of his, remote in one hand, a cold beer in the other. Eyes glued to whatever sports game was on. Meanwhile, I'd curl up on the couch with a book. Though more often than not, I'd end up scrolling through recipe websites. Bookmarking meals I'd probably never actually cook. It was comfortable, sure, safe, predictable as sunrise. But if I'm being honest, it was also becoming a little, well, boring so when Tom casually mentioned over breakfast one Tuesday morning that his cousin Mark would be staying with us for the weekend. I felt something stir inside me. Not excitement exactly, that would be too strong a word. But definitely something a ripple in our still pond of routine. Mark's driving cross-country, Tom explained, buttering his toast with the same careful precision he applied to everything. Needs a place to crash for a couple nights. Remember Mark, right? I paused, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Mark, the name brought back fuzzy memories from family reunions and holiday gatherings. He was Tom's cousin from his mother's side, the one who'd moved out to California for some high-tech job that sounded important but made no sense to me. I remembered him as being different. Not bad, different. Not quite fitting the mold of Tom's family, who were all practical. Down-to-earth Midwestern folks who fixed their own cars and grew their own tomatoes. Of course I remember him. I said, though truthfully, my memories were more like glimpses through frosted glass, unclear and uncertain. When's he coming? It's Friday. He'll probably stay through Sunday. Tom looked up from his toast, his brown eyes hopeful. It'll be fun, Sarah. Break up the routine a bit. I smiled and nodded, pushing down a flutter of something that felt almost like nervousness. Why should I be nervous? Mark was family, practically speaking. But there was something about the idea of disrupting our careful, quiet life that made my stomach do tiny flips. The rest of the week crawled by slower than usual. I found myself actually looking forward to Friday, which surprised me. I planned meals, made sure the guest room was perfect, even bought fresh flowers for the kitchen table. Tom noticed my extra effort and smiled that warm, satisfied smile that had first made me fall in love with him 25 years ago. You're going all out, he observed, watching me arrange the flowers. Just want him to feel welcome, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure why it mattered so much to me. Friday evening arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that makes you want to light candles and make soup. I'd spent the afternoon preparing my famous lasagna, the one Tom always brags about to his buddies at work. Layers of pasta, meat, sauce, and 3 different cheeses. Enough to feed a small army or at least one extra guest with a good appetite. By 7 o'clock, I was pacing between the kitchen and living room, checking the lasagna, straightening cushions that didn't need straightening, smoothing my apron for the 10th time. Tom sat in his chair, but even he seemed restless, glancing at the window every few minutes. Then headlights swept across our front window, cutting through the early darkness. That's him. Tom jumped up with more energy than I'd seen from him. In months, his face lit up like a kid's on Christmas morning. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, prepared myself to meet this cousin I barely remembered. The man who walked through our front door wasn't quite what my foggy memory had preserved. Time had definitely been kind to Mark. Kinder than it had been to most of us, if I'm being honest. He still had that lean, athletic build I vaguely remembered. But the years had added something distinguished to his appearance. His dark hair was now streaked with silver at the temples. Not gray exactly, but a striking silver that caught the light. And his eyes, I'd forgotten about his eyes. They were the clearest blue I'd ever seen, like looking into a mountain lake on a perfect summer day. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense, not like Tom with his solid, dependable good looks that had caught my attention all those years. But there was something about Mark that drew your attention and held it. A quiet intensity, maybe? Or just the way he seemed to really see you when he looked at you. Tom, Mark's voice boomed through our usually quiet house as he rapped, my husband in a bear hug that lifted Tom right off his feet. The sound of their laughter filled every corner, chasing away the silence that had become so familiar. Then he turned to me, and those clear blue eyes focused on my face with an attention that made me suddenly self-conscious. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand, "it's so wonderful to see you again. Thank you for opening your home to me." His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his gaze direct but kind. When he complimented our house, the warm smell of the lasagna drifting from the kitchen, the cozy feeling of our living room, it didn't sound like empty politeness. Sounded genuine, like he really noticed and appreciated these things. Over dinner, Mark and Tom fell into the easy rhythm of old friends. They shared stories I'd heard Tom tell a dozen times, but somehow Mark's versions were different, richer. He had a gift for adding small details that brought the past to life. The way the morning mist looked over the lake where they used to. Fish, the exact color of the sky the day they got caught in that thunderstorm. The sound their grandmother's screen door made when it slammed shut. But what impressed me most was how he listened. Really listened. Not just waiting for his turn to talk, but actually hearing what Tom was saying, asking follow-up questions. Showing genuine interest in Tom's work at the hardware store, in Emily's adjustment to college life. "And what about you, Sarah?" he asked, turning those attentive eyes on me. "Tom tells me you have the most beautiful rose garden in the neighborhood." I was startled. "You remember that? From Janet and Mike's wedding, right? You mentioned your prize winning roses. I remember thinking how passionate you sounded about it. That was 5 years ago." I couldn't believe he remembered such a small detail from such a brief conversation. It made me feel seen, somehow important. We talked about my garden, about Emily's first semester away from home, about the way autumn looked different this year. Mark didn't offer empty reassurances or platitudes when I mentioned how quiet the house had become. Instead, he shared a story about his own early days in California. How he'd felt adrift and disconnected, making choices that seemed right but left him feeling hollow. "It's natural to feel unsettled when the rhythm of your life changes," he said, quietly. "But sometimes that unsettled feeling is just making room for something new to grow." His words settled into my chest like warmth from a fireplace. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to understand that feeling. To not just tell me it would pass or that I should stay busy. When I started clearing the dinner plates, Mark immediately stood to help, ignoring Tom's protests that he was a guest and shouldn't work. "Nonsense," Mark said, stacking plates with practiced efficiency. "My mother would roll over in her grave if she knew I sat idle while a woman cleaned up after cooking for me." We worked side by side at the kitchen sink, the warm, soapy water, the gentle clink of dishes. The comfortable silence between us. It felt natural, easy, like we'd done this dance 100 times before. "Tom's a lucky man," Mark said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper as he rinsed a plate. "This house feels like a real home. You can feel the love in the walls." It was such a simple thing to say, but the way he said it with quiet sincerity, like he was sharing a secret, made my breath catch. This wasn't casual flattery or guest politeness. This felt like truth. "Thank you," I managed, surprised by how touched I was. "That means a lot." By the time we finished the dishes, Tom had already dozed off in his recliner, the television flickering over his peaceful face. This was his nightly ritual: dinner, TV, then drifting off in his chair until I gently woke him to come to bed. Mark and I found ourselves in the living room, the only light coming from the small lamp beside the couch. He'd accepted a glass of Tom's good whiskey and was swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully, seemingly lost in his own thoughts. The rain had stopped, And the house was wrapped in that special kind of quiet that only comes after a storm. I wasn't sure what to say. The earlier ease of dinner conversation had been replaced by something more complex, more aware. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged with an energy I couldn't quite name. "It's peaceful here," Mark said finally, his voice low so as not to wake. "Tom, out west, everything's always moving, always loud. Always rushing toward the next thing." I'd forgotten what real quiet sounds like. We talked then, our voices soft in the lamplit room. Not about anything earth-shattering, just about life's quiet rhythms. The way the seasons changed differently in different places. The books we loved. The small moments that made up a day. Worth living. I discovered that Mark had a surprising passion for classic literature. Something that had always been my private joy, but that Tom found as interesting as watching paint dry. We talked about characters who felt like old friends, about authors who could build entire worlds with just words on a page. It was easy, this conversation natural. But underneath the easy flow of words, there was something else, an undercurrent of connection that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Not flirting, nothing inappropriate or wrong, but a meeting of minds that felt rare and precious. When I finally said goodnight and headed upstairs, leaving Mark looking out at our darkened garden, I felt strangely unsettled. But it was a good kind of unsettled, like the feeling you get standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you're perfectly safe but aware of the vast possibilities spread out below you. The predictable quiet of our house suddenly felt different, charged with potential. It's full of questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. It's a perfect contrast to Friday's gray drizzle. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching dust motes that danced in the golden beams like tiny planets in their own private universe. Tom was already up and dressed in his weekend uniform, faded jeans worn soft from years of wear, a red flannel shirt that had seen better days but was too comfortable to throw away. He was bustling around the kitchen with unusual energy, making coffee and talking excitedly about taking Mark to see the old covered bridge just outside town. "It's got history," Tom explained, as if Mark might not understand the importance of local landmarks built in 1887, still standing strong. "We used to dare each other to cross it at night when we were kids." Mark appeared in the doorway, looking refreshed and relaxed, dressed simply in jeans and a gray t-shirt that somehow made his blue eyes seem even brighter. His hair was still damp from the shower, and he smelled faintly of soap and something woodsy. Cologne or aftershave that wasn't too strong, just pleasant. "Good morning," he said, accepting the mug of coffee Tom offered with genuine appreciation. "I slept better than I have in months." There's something about country quiet that just settles your soul. Over breakfast, pancakes from scratch, bacon, crispy just the way Tom liked it. Fresh orange juice, the easy friendship from the night before, picked up right where it had left off. Mark seemed genuinely interested in the covered bridge story, asking questions about its construction, the local history, the memories Tom and his friends had made there. I found myself watching Mark more than I probably should have. Not in any inappropriate way, just noticing things. The way he really listened when Tom talked, his head tilted slightly, his eyes focused. The way he asked thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely interested, not just being polite. The way he laughed at Tom's stories, even the ones that weren't particularly funny, because he understood they were important to Tom. After breakfast, the men headed out for their historical expedition, leaving me alone with the house again. But this time, the quiet felt different. Not empty or lonely, but expectant. Like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I kept busy with weekend chores, laundry, dusting, planning dinner, but my mind kept drifting back to the conversations from the night before. The unexpected ease I'd felt talking with Mark, the way he'd looked at me when he said our house felt like a real home. The connection I'd felt when we discovered our shared love of books, when Tom and Mark returned a couple of hours later. Their faces flushed from the crisp autumn air, They were both laughing about some memory the bridge had triggered. Tom looked happier and more energetic than I'd seen him in months, clearly thriving on the chance to reconnect with his cousin and relive old adventures. "You should have seen it, Sarah," Tom said, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair. "Bridge is still solid as a rock. We walked across it 3 times, just like we used to do when we were 12 years old." While Tom settled into his chair to watch the afternoon football game, need to recover from all that walking, he joked. Mark wandered into the kitchen where I was starting to prepare vegetables for dinner. "Need any help?" he asked, leaning casually against the counter. "'Kay, only if you're good at peeling potatoes," I replied, handing him a peeler and pointing to a bowl of russets. Waiting on the counter, we worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic scrape of the peelers creating a soothing soundtrack. Then Mark started asking about my garden again. Not just polite questions this time, but detailed ones that showed he was genuinely curious. He wanted to know about my vegetable patch, the herbs I grew, the challenges of gardening in our climate as we talked. I realized he wasn't just making conversation. He was really listening, filing away information, asking follow-up questions that showed he cared about the answers. It was a gift, this kind of attention, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing until I experienced it again. Polite questions, he seemed genuinely curious about the process, the satisfaction of growing things yourself. He mentioned he tried container gardening on his small balcony back home, but hadn't had much luck. We talked about soil composition, sunlight frustrations, of pests, mundane topics perhaps, but the conversation floated effortlessly. He shared a funny story about a disastrous attempt at growing tomatoes that ended with more squirrels thawing fruit, enjoying the harvest, Elod picturing it, and shared my own tale of battling aphids on my prized peppers. It was in these simple, momentary, everyday experiences and frustrations that the connection deepened. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was a quiet unfolding, like a flower opening petal by petal. In the warmth of the sun later that afternoon, while rummaging in Thatic for an old photo album Tom wanted to show Mark, I stumbled upon a box of Emily's childhood drawings. Markwo had followed me up the creaky attic stairs, ostensibly to help pick one UPA. Colorful, chaotic crayon drawing of orphanly stick figures with impossibly wide a cell. He studied it for a moment, a soft smile playing on his lips. "She's got your eyes," he said, glancing at me. It was a simple observation, but it landed with surprising gain. Looking at that drawing standing amidst the dusty relics of our past, a wave of nostalgia washed over me, mingled with a strange awareness of the present moment of Mark standing so close, sharing this glimpse into our familiar story to rights. Looking through the photoalbums, Tom narrated the pictures, with gusto, pointing out awkward teenage phases and forgotten family trips. Mark listened intently, but occasionally high sighs would meet mine across the album as lant acknowledgement passing between us. Of time past, of memories made of Thepipool. We had become, there was no impropriety, nothing Tom could possibly innate or misconstrue, yet the air between Mark and me felt charged alive with unspoken understanding as the afternoon wore on the subtle tension I'd felt the night before returned, humming beneath the surface of casual conversation and shared laughter. Wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't inubly there a heightened awareness, a sense that this weekend was shifting something within me, nudging me out of my comfortable predictability in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dinner was roast chicken this time. Another crowd-pleaser conversation flowed easily, filled with Tom and Mark shared history, but punctuated by those fleeting glance-toes shared moments of understanding. Whiten Mark and me, I felt engaged, alive, participating, not just as Tom's wife and hostess, but as myself. Sarah, connecting with someone who seemed to see beyond the roles I usually played. The day had been filled with simple activities, yet it felt significant, laying the groundwork for something deeper, something I couldn't yet define, but felt unfolding with a quiet certainty. Saturday evening settled upon the house like a soft blanket. Was cleared away, and Tom, content after a good Meal and reconnecting with Mark decided to turn in early, pleading a busy Sunday ahead. Yard work wouldn't do itself heed, mumbled good-naturedly. Familiar sounds of him getting ready for bed drifted downstairs, taps running, floorboards creaking. Overheating Mark and me alone again in the living room's warm glow. The television was off, the only sounds, the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the occasional sigh of the house settling. Mark had poured himself another small measure off whiskey, and I'd made myself a cup of chamomile tea. We sat in comfortable sense. For a while, him in the armchair opposite, the sofa where I curled my feet up, the easy conversation of the afternoon seemed to have paused, replaced. A contemplative quiet. It wasn't awkward, though it felt respectful, as I few both sensed a shift in the atmosphere. That Tom wasn't there. Mark Fenella broke the silence, his voice soft. Tom seems really happy, Sarah. Content. You've built a good life here, Hewitt. Looking at me but swirling. The whiskey in his glass, his gaze distant. We have, I agreed, my voice equally quiet. It's comfortable, stable. The word hung in the air, comfortable, stable, predictable. Is that all? He looked up, then his blue eyes meeting mine. Across space is comfortable. Enough. The question wasn't an accusation, nor was it flirtatious. It was genuinely curious, probing gently beneath the surface. It mirrored questions I'd sometimes asked myself. In the dead of night, questions he'd quickly pushed away. Isn't it supposed to? I countered, trying to keep my tone light, but my voice wavered slightly. He didn't press. Instead, he shifted topic, asking about my old dream of opening a small bookstore cafe. Something I'd mentioned briefly years ago. Something even Tom's forget about amidst the practicalities of life. I was stunned. He remembered wet-hawked about that dream, about the passion I'd once had for literature, for creating a space where people could connect. Over books and coffee, I had not spoken about it with such enthusiasm. In your smark. Listened, truly listened, asking insightful questions, offering general corkagent, sharing his own experiences of career changes and chasing seemingly impractical dreams, has spoke about his own life. The pressures off his tech job, the transient nature of relationships on the West Coast, surprising loneliness that so met him has crept in. Despite his outward success, Hugh and complaining. He was simply sharing, being vulnerable in a way that invited vulnerability. In return, we talked 4 hours. It seemed the clock ticked on an honest. We moved from dreams and careers to fears and regrets. Sharing pieces of ourselves we usually kept feeding. There was an intimacy in that conversation that transcended the physical. It was a meeting of souls, a recognition of shared humanity, of the complexities and quiet longings that lie beneath the surface of everyday life. A tone point, talking about a particular difficult period after my mother passed away. Tears welled in my eyes. I quickly tried to blink them away, embarrassed. Mark didn't say anything platitudinous, simply reached across the small space separating us and gently rested his hand over mine where it lay on the sofa cushion. His touch was brief, just a few seconds, warm and reassuring. It wasn't romantic or suggestive. It was purely comforting, a gesture of empathy that spoke volumes. In that moment, the connection between us solidified. It wasn't about desire in the conventional sense. It was about being seen, truly seen and understood on a level I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Maybe ever. It was a profound emotional resonance. Unexpected and incredibly full. The climax of the Weekend West. A dramatic event. But this quiet enfolding intimacy. This shared vulnerability under the lamplight. It wasted realization that connection could take surprising forms, that you could feel deeply understood by someone you barely knew, someone who was bid definition just passing through. We didn't solve each other's problems or declare undying feelings. We simply shared a space, a moment in time, where masks were lowered and true selves were glimpsed. When we finally did say goodnight, standing awkwardly in the hallway, there was a shared understanding, a mutual respect for the boundary cross, and not physically but emotionally. Thank you, Sarah. He said, his voice husky, for the conversation, for everything. Thank you, Mark. I replied, meeting his gaze upstairs, lying in bed beside a gently snoring Tom sleep-looted me. My mind replayed the conversation, the shared laughter theme, immense of quiet, understanding the brief comforting touch of his hand. Nothing illicit had happened yet. Everything felt different. The comfortable quiet of my life had been stirred, not unpleasantly, profoundly. Window had been opened, letting in fresh air, revealing possibilities I hadn't considered, feelings now I was capable of. The weekend, Westo, over yet? But I knew deep down thought its impact would linger long after Mark drove away Sunday. Morning arrivo too quickly, carrying with it the inevitable feeling of an ending. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, mocking the quiet. Melancholy settling in my chest. Breakfast was a slightly more subdued affair than the day before. Tom was preoccupied with his Lestef yard chores. Mark was packing his current. I was trying to act normal, pouring coffee and making small talk while Mimmin felt miles away. The easy camaraderie was still there. Butunderland, now with the knowledge of Mark's imminent departure and spoken depth of the previous night's conversation. Mark thanked Tom profusely for his hospitality, clapping him on the back. They exchanged promises to stay in touch more often, the kind of promise easily made and often forgotten, buttoned with sincerity. This time then Mark turned to me. He took my hand. Not just a brief shake this time, but holding it for a moment, his gaze steady and filled with warmth. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and earnest, "thank you truly for making me feel so welcome and for the conversation." I squeezed his hand back, unable to find adequate words. "Drive safe, Mark. It was good having youth." Farewell wasn't tearful or dramatic. It was quiet, respectful, acknowledging unexpected connection we'd formed without needing to label it or make it more than it was. Watching his car pull away from the curb, disappearing down the street, I felt a pang, a sense of something significant. King Tom came up behind me, upon an arm around my shoulders. "Well, that was nice, wasn't it? Good old Mark doesn't seem to have changed much." I leaned into Tom's familiar embrace, a wave of affection washing over me in gold, with the new awareness Mark's visit had sparked. "No," I said softly, "it was realness." The rest of the day unfolded in its usual Sunday rhythm. Tom tackled dayard work with gusto. I did some laundry, read the paper, and later we took a quiet walk around the neighborhood. As the afternoon light began to fade, the comfortable silence between us felt different, though. Before it had sometimes felt like a void. Now it felt like space, filled with my own thoughts, reflections, and a newfound sense of self. Mark's visit hadn't magically solved anything or revealed some deep dissatisfaction with my life or marriage. Ton was a good man, and our life together was good, built on years of shared history and genuine affection. But Mark, in his brief stay, had reminded me of parts of myself I'd let lie dormant: the dreamer, the passion at a reader, the person capable of deep intellectual connection. He had offered an escape, but rather a mirror reflecting back a version of Sarah I hadn't seen clearly in a while. The experience was unexpected, yes, but profoundly anging. It showed me that emotional intimacy could blossom in surprising places. That connection wasn't limited to romantic partners or lifelong friends. It was about being open, being present, and allowing yourself to be truly seen. There was a subtle tension, yes, but it resolved not into conflict or transgression. Butinto, a deeper understanding of myself and my own capacity for connection. In days and weeks that followed, the house settled back into its quiet routine. Tom returned to his recliner. Emily called from college. The season's gone tuned to turn, but something within him had shifted. I started visiting Thella Braymore, picked up books I'd been meaning to read for years. I even started sketching. I'd rough plans for that little bookstore cafe, not with any concrete intention of opening in Amoro, but just allowing myself to dream again, to nurture that part of myself, the memory of that weekend after his conversations under the lamplight. It faded, became a quiet, too stony a reminder of the depth and richness that can lie beneath the surface of a comfortable life, a reminder that personal growth often comes from unexpected It wasn't about Mark Notrali. It was about the Sarah he helped Maradisker. And for that, I would always be grateful the weekend my husband Skousen stayed. Was indeed one I wouldn't forget. Not because of some scandalous event, but because of the quiet, profound way it reopened my own heart and mind.